Good morning to those of you who have joined. We're just going to wait a couple of more minutes before we get started.
Y bienvenidos a todos ustedes que se nos están uniendo esta mañana. Vamos a esperar solamente unos minutos para darle oportunidad a otras personas de que nos acompañen. Gracias.
Okay, good morning. Thank you all for joining this morning. My name is Sabrina Alley, and I'm the Director of Communications and Community Engagement for the Denver Department of Housing Stability. We're here today for our HOME-ARP allocation consultation meeting, and we'll tell you more about what that is in just a minute. But first, I wanted to introduce Nora Medina, who's our Spanish translator, and Katie Hampston, who's doing ASL interpretation. Thanks for joining us today. Nora, do you want to make your announcement?
Perfect.
Thank you.
Let me also introduce you in Spanish before I make the announcement. Mi nombre es Sabrina Ali. Soy la directora de comunicaciones e involucramiento comunitario del Departamento de Estabilidad de la Vivienda de Denver. Les doy la bienvenida esta mañana a esta reunión de consulta para asignación de fondos HOME-ARP. Y voy a dejarles saber también que hay interpretación disponible al español esta mañana. Por favor, utilicen el icono del globo terráqueo que está en la parte de abajo de la pantalla. Por favor, púlsenlo y escojan su lenguaje de preferencia. Puede ser español si lo necesitan o inglés también si así lo quieren hacer. Good morning, and I just would like to introduce the interpretation services that we're offering this morning. We would like to ask that if you could please go to the bottom of your screen. You're going to find an icon. It's a globe, and you will click it and choose your language of preference. It is very important for everybody to choose a language of preference to be able to listen others speaking in the language that is not your primary. Thank you very much. Sabrina, go ahead.
Thank you, Nora. Yes, so now you'll be able to see that little globe at the bottom of the screen that says interpretation. Again, if you'll just take a moment to click on it, and then you can click on English or Spanish, whichever you prefer. And then we also, as I said, have our ASL interpretation as well. Thank you all for being here today. Also wanted to point out some of the Zoom functions on the bottom of your screen. We, during public meetings like this, turn off the chat so as not to lose people's questions in a long thread. And so we instead use the Q&A function in Zoom. That way we don't miss anyone's questions. So at the bottom of the screen, you can click on the Q&A and you'll be able to submit whatever questions you have. Katie and myself will do our best to answer those questions as we go through the presentation. And if we don't get to them right away, please bear with us. That means that we're going to wait and ask our subject matter experts to answer those questions for us when we get to a break for questions and answers. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to introduce you to our Department of Housing Stability's Housing Opportunity Deputy Director, Renee Gallegos, to kick us off this morning.
Thank you, Sabrina. I just want to echo Sabrina's comments to welcome everybody here this morning, to thank you for joining us for this public consultation meeting among some of our partners. I am thrilled to be here. For those of you that I haven't had the opportunity to meet, I've actually been in this role of Deputy Director of Housing Opportunity for about 5 weeks now. So I'm still relatively new, but I am thrilled to be here, to be joining the team of dedicated and passionate professionals who are here that form the Department of Housing Stability for the City and County of Denver. HOST, probably many of you are familiar with the term, but the Office of Housing Stability was a new department formed by Mayor Hancock back in 2019 to consolidate. He created it by executive order to consolidate the various functions within the city that were working on housing issues, and to create a department that was focused primarily on housing and homelessness, and bringing those professionals together under one department to ensure coordination of our work, and allow us to work more effectively to fulfill our mission, which is to invest resources, create policy, and partner to provide housing stability, resolve episodes of homelessness, and create housing opportunities for members in our Denver community. So I'm thrilled to be a part of this team, and to be jumping into the wide array of initiatives and projects that the city has undertaken to fulfill our mission. One of which is the application of these HOME-ARP funds. If we could change it to the next slide, please. And the primary reason that we are all here today is to gather your input from our community partners and community members on how to spend the approximately $10.5 million in HOME-ARP funding that has been awarded to the city and county of Denver. The HOME-ARP funding was funded through the American Rescue Plan Act that was signed last year, and as an entitlement community, Denver was awarded a portion of this extra pot of funds that has a particular purpose and a particular focus area that Austin will be diving into. And so we are right in the process right now of gathering input from our community partners on how we should spend this $10.5 million in new funding, one-time funding, and gathering input to make sure that we are using it to meet within the guidelines that have been created by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which oversees the HOME program, and making sure that we are putting it towards the most pressing needs that are in alignment with our 5-year strategic plan and our action plan for the year. So, and as a part of that, Denver has joined the Housing America, the Housing America program, which is kind of tracking what cities across the country are doing with those funds. I want to make sure that I give Austin the opportunity to dive into that. Before I would want to also make sure that I recognize the other members of our housing opportunity team that I believe are on the call with us today. I believe we've got our Director of Housing Development, Jennifer Balcom, and Adam Lyons, our lead Housing Development Officer, who work closely with Austin to put these funds to work. But with that, I will hand it over to Austin so that he can dive a little bit deeper into the discussion and share a little bit more information about this great new funding source so that we could start gathering your input. Austin?
Thank you, Renee. Hi, everyone. I'm Austin Meehan, Housing Development Officer at HOST. First, I wanted to give a quick introduction of House America for those of you who aren't familiar. House America is a federal initiative to address homelessness through a housing first approach. It did not come with dedicated additional funds, but rather asked cities how they'll utilize home investment partnerships program funds and other funds to help resolve episodes of homelessness. It aims to house at least 100,000 households experiencing homelessness while adding at least 20,000 new units of affordable housing to the pipeline nationally by September 30th, 2022. Next slide, please. So what is Housing First? HOST believes that a stable home is the foundation from which our members of the community are better able to meet their other needs, whether that's finding a new or better paying job, reconnecting with family, or engaging in behavioral health treatment. Based on this fundamental philosophy, HOST centers its response to homelessness on a housing first approach. Housing First calls for us to offer people housing without the precondition of treatment or compliance with rules beyond those that we all abide by when renting an apartment. and for offering services and support on a voluntary basis when someone is in housing. In some ways, this approach is intuitive. It's easier, for example, to engage in a job search when you have a stable address, to list on applications, or to consistently take your medications when you have a medicine cabinet in which to store them. Housing First is also evidence-based. This approach has become critical to solving homelessness across the country. The pandemic slowed rehousing activities due to capacity issues, and its impact on rental market vacancies, and also created an additional urgency to address the crisis, given the heightened risk faced by people experiencing homelessness. Next slide. So to support Denver's House America effort, HOST intends to house at least 500 residents experiencing homelessness and support 144 units of affordable housing. We plan to do this by allocating funds from these various sources that you see here. First, there's the ESGCV, which stands for Emergency Solutions Grant Coronavirus, and that comes in the amount of $5.3 million. Second, Coronavirus Relief Fund, or CRF, dollars totaling $2.5 million. And third, there's the emergency housing vouchers via Denver Housing Authority. And last, why we're here today, we have the Home Investment Partnerships Program, ARP funds, in the amount of roughly $10.8 million in total. And that amount will be roughly $10.5 million, as I said earlier, once admin and other program costs are backed out. Next slide, please. So the Home Investment Partnerships Program, or HOME, is the largest federal block program to state and local governments designed exclusively to create affordable housing for low-income households. HOME funds are awarded annually as formula grants to participating jurisdictions, or as I'll call them a few times coming up in these slides, PJs, like the letter P and J. It provides formula grants to states and localities that communities use, often in partnership with local nonprofit groups, to fund a wide range of activities, including building, buying, and or rehabilitating affordable housing for rent or ownership, or provide direct rental assistance to low-income people. These home funds come with a minimum 15-year compliance period. Next slide. And now for the American Rescue Plan. President Biden signed the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 into law on March 11th, 2021. Its purpose is to provide over $1.9 trillion in relief to address the continued impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on the economy, public health, state and local governments, individuals, and businesses. Next slide, please. HOST anticipates receiving a $10.8 million grant from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, for these HOME-ARP funds. Of that $10.8 million, the city expects roughly $10.5 million will be available to lend after subtracting as administrative costs, as I mentioned before. As far as the timeline goes, projects must be in our pipeline and identified by the end of this year, but do not have to be fully spent until September 30th, 2030. Next slide, please. HOME-ARP funds may be used to acquire, rehabilitate, or construct affordable rental housing, primarily for households that meet the definition of one or more of the qualifying populations. These are also known as qualifying households, and I and HUD will refer to these as QPs. Unlike the regular home program, which targets home-assisted rental units based on tenant income, 70% of all HOME-ARP units will admit households based only upon their status as qualifying households. The main project or tenant-based uses are listed here in orange. If you're familiar with standard home funds, you might notice some key differences between these standard home funds and HOME-ARP funds. The per unit caps are gone, which means that HOME-ARP can pay for up to the full capital cost of a unit and can more effectively fill gaps in projects and also cover other expenses such as operating and services to make projects viable. HOME-ARP can be used to pay for services through 2030. This provision makes it possible to pay for support services consistent with Housing First approaches. While it doesn't ensure that the services will be available through the 15-year compliance period, it still offers an opportunity for PJs to bridge Medicaid funding or other funding streams to make providers viable. Next page. So included in HUD's definition of homeless are people or families who will imminently lose their permanent home due to a lack of resources or support, and they also include youth under the age of 25 that does not have a permanent home, even if accompanied by an adult. To qualify as at risk of homelessness, a household must have 3 characteristics. It must earn under 30% of the median family income for Denver and have an insufficient support network. And they live in housing that has characteristics associated with instability and an increased risk of homelessness. The city has previously outlined several factors that have been linked with instability and an increased risk of homelessness. They include housing costs rising more rapidly than wages, job loss or hours being cut back, and housing condition deterioration. Individuals who have skipped a housing payment or sought additional employment to pay expenses or have sacrificed basic needs to pay their housing costs are also at an increased risk. Next slide. So let's talk some numbers. 84% of all households in Denver that earn at or below 30% of the median income are renters, and HOME-ARP is one program that can help address this disparity. As the city has grown at an unusually fast pace, the housing market worked to respond to this increase in demand. It added approximately 34,000 rental units between 2010 and 2019. The new development, however, has been increasingly concentrated at or above 80% of AMI due to the disproportionate growth of households in that upper range. Through its 5-year strategic planning process, HOST has heard the need for long-term, deeply affordable units. This figure from that plan illustrates with the gray wave the number of renter households, and in the red text, the shortage of available units. It shows that affordability needs are mostly concentrated below 60% of AMI, where more households need units than we have stock. It also shows that new development is concentrated at or above 100% of AMI. And lastly, while public assistance helps stabilize low-income housing options, it is inefficient to address the needs of the city at current time. Next slide, please. So, with the data and feedback compiled for the strategic plan in mind, I'll briefly introduce a few ideas that HOST had in mind for some portion of its HOME-ARP allocation. These are not meant to be an exhaustive list of eligible uses that HOST plans to target, but they would support HOST's 5-year goal to expand affordable housing opportunities. Next slide, please. One of HOST's idea for how to utilize part of this allocation is to provide additional subsidy to one or more projects in order to buy down 60% of AMI units to 30% of AMI units. This would create deeper affordability in projects already in the pipeline and in projects that may not otherwise accommodate any extremely low-income households. In this scenario, developers will have already come to HOST seeking gap financing for a project that includes, say, 10% of units to be affordable for a household making 60% of AMI. During underwriting, HOST will offer additional dollars per unit to bring that percentage up to, say, 20%. This tactic would allow HOST to engage multiple partners and impact several demographics. It may also facilitate greater geographic diversity with respect to the allocation of funds. Some questions, though, still remain, such as whether these projects would need additional operating subsidy due to this deeper affordability. Next slide, please. Another option is to directly acquire, redevelop, and manage the long-term affordability of one or more hotel or motel properties for long-term use as permanent supportive housing or housing to serve extremely low-income households. Next slide, please. And the third and similar idea that Host had is to subsidize the partner-led acquisition and redevelopment of one or more hotel or motel properties, also for long-term use as permanent supportive housing or housing to serve extremely low-income households. Both these ideas, 2 and 3, present their own challenges, such as cost and timing, but would ultimately be providing the city with much-needed units that may not be available otherwise. Next slide, please. And so with that all said and done, we really want to hear any feedback you have. We deliberately made this presentation pretty brief so that respondents could fill out a survey, which you can actually get to by clicking that link on the slide. And we'll also paste it in the chat for everyone. An email will also be sent out to partners after this meeting. You can also email me at austin.meehan@denvergov.org with the subject HOME-ARP input if you'd like to speak to me directly. And I will also drop in the link shortly a link to HUD's HOME-ARP implementation notice so that you can read more about the details of the program if you haven't already. And with that, I believe I'll open it up to Sabrina for our Q&A.
Thanks, Austin. I was just going to ask if somebody wouldn't mind putting a question in the Q&A just to ask us for the links. We will go ahead and put those in there. Unfortunately, the way this interface works, we aren't allowed to just drop things into the Q&A. So we just need a question for that. And we'll get those links in there for both the survey and to reach out to Austin. So next steps, we do really want to hear from you on your feedback. So we have developed this survey that Austin just mentioned to try and get your feedback on what you've heard about today, help us prioritize, and also there's an opportunity for open-ended comment in that survey. As Austin mentioned, you can also email him directly with any additional comments that you may have. We are holding today's consultation meeting as well as one that happened last week to help us get expertise from all of you and subject matter experts in our community and to hear back from you on your initial thoughts before Austin goes ahead and moves forward with developing the final plan. That final plan will be posted on our website and there will be a March public hearing coming. We have not yet announced the date on that because we wanted to make sure we had ample time to incorporate everyone's suggestions and get that draft put together before we announce the date, but it will be sometime in March. That will be posted on our website and put out through our newsletter. And then we'll again release that draft proposal on the website, denvergov.org/housing. There will be a 15-day public comment period on that proposal. And again, that will coincide with the March public hearing. And then it will be formally adopted with any additional changes. With that, if anybody has any other questions, want to invite you again to just scroll over the bottom of your Zoom and it'll say Q&A. If you want to submit any questions in the chat, you may do so. And we're happy to answer those. And otherwise, again, we're happy to, Katie, if you want to go back maybe and just let people look one more time at Austin's email. Happy to take your comments and feedback through Austin's email directly. And again, invite you to please participate in the survey to let us know what you think about the proposals and ideas that were put forward today. And I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A, so I think that will conclude today's presentation. Please reach out to us if you have any questions. We look forward to hearing from you all. All right. Thanks again. Have a great day.